We already covered the giant predators that mostly leave humans alone. Now it's time to flip the question. Which animals actually see us as food? A theory has been spreading across podcasts and YouTube channels lately, claiming there are only 4 animals on the entire planet that deliberately and systematically hunt human beings: the polar bear, the tiger, the leopard, and the Nile crocodile. It sounds authoritative. It sounds scientific. But is that number really accurate, or is it a convenient shortcut that ignores a mountain of field data? And here's the part that should immediately raise an eyebrow. This list somehow leaves out the African lion, an animal with one of the St. well-documented man-eating histories on the continent. When a wild animal kills a person, it's tempting to assume the worst, that it was hunting them on purpose. But is that always true? Where exactly does a defensive reaction end and a predatory hunt begin? And which apex predators got unfairly left off the list? Let's dig into it. Where the Big Four theory came from. The claim didn't come out of now here. It traces back to a well-known wildlife biologist and television personality who has hosted several Animal Planet series. In a hand full of recent podcast appearances, he presented a very specific, very quotable idea. Across the whole planet, only 4 species actively hunt humans as prey. One popular outdoor survival podcast picked up the claim, repeated it, and from there it spread across short-form video platforms at lightning speed, packaged as an easily digestible fact. The 4 species named were the polar bear, the tiger, the leo, pard, and the Nile crocodile. Before picking this apart, we need to be fair about the framing. The claim explicitly excludes indirect killers, things like mosquitoes carrying malaria, or bacteria, or parasites. It's strictly about large carnivores that physically stalk, kill, and try to eat a human being. That's a completely reasonable starting point for a conversation. The real problem isn't the framing. Oh, it's the certainty. The claim is presented as a closed, settled fact, when in behavioral biology, the line between a defensive strike, an opportunistic encounter, and a deliberate hunt is almost never a clean, obvious boundary. To scientifically label an attack as truly predatory, meaning the animal viewed the human as a meal, not a threat, researchers rely on a specific, tested set of criteria. Was the body dragged away from the scene? Was there an attempt to hide or bury the remains? Did the animal come back later to feed? These are the actual benchmarks used in peer-reviewed research, not gut feelings or dramatic reconstruction. And to be clear, using exactly those criteria, all 4 species on the viral list absolutely earn their spot. Tigers have produced individual man-eaters responsible for dozens, sometimes hundreds of deaths. Leopards in parts of India carry a nearly identical historical record. Nile crocodiles are tied to hundreds of deaths across Africa every year. And when polar bears do encounter people, which is rare, historical Arctic records show the overwhelming majority of those attacks were driven by genuine predatory hunger. So the data doesn't disprove the 4 species list, it just ovas, the list is incomplete. Nature doesn't organize itself into neat top 4 rankings, and once you start pulling in field research on other species, that exclusive club of 4 starts looking a lot less exclusive. Why simple lists are seductive and misleading. Human brains are wired to love simple categories. When we're afraid of something as vast and uncontrollable as the natural world, narrowing the danger down to 4 named monsters gives us a comforting sense of control. The problem is that field ecology almost never cooperates with that kind of tidy storytelling, and the cracks in the Big Four model start showing up the moment you check the numbers against her bear species. The bear family problem. Start with bears, since that's usually the first family people bring up in these conversations. The polar bear makes intuitive sense as a man-eater. It's the largest land carnivore alive, with adult males regularly weighing between 450 and 600 kilograms. It survives in one of the harshest environments on Earth, where its primary prey, seals, becomes scarce dependent. Actual field data tells a more layered story. According to long-term tracking compiled by Polar Bear International, across a 144-year window between 1870 and 2014, researchers documented only 73 confirmed attacks worldwide, resulting in 20 deaths. Of those attacks, roughly 88% were classified as genuinely predatory, meaning the bear wasn't lashing out in fear, it was treating the person as food. Even tending the data forward to 2024, the cumulative death toll only rises to around 25 fatalities. That's an extraordinarily low number SP read across more than a century and a half. This isn't because polar bears are secretly gentle. It's simply because almost none of their range overlaps with permanent human settlement. Here's where it gets interesting. If the actual qualifying metric is a high percentage of attacks being genuinely predatory, Why does the list include the polar bear while ignoring other bear species with an almost identical profile? A 2011 study published in the journal Human-Wildlife Interactions went through every fatal American black bear attack recorded in North America between 1900 and 2009. The result, among the fatal cases, roughly 88% were classified as predatory behavior status, tightly identical to the polar bear's rate. On top of that, around 92% of the attacking bears were solitary wild males, a detail that mirrors typical predatory behavior patterns seen in other carnivores. And critically, in raw body count, black bears have killed far more people overall than polar bears, simply because they live so much closer to human populations. Brown bears, for comparison, show a much low or predatory rate, closer to 11%, according to a British Columbia study, with most fatal encounters being defensive reactions or about her protecting cubs rather than hunting behavior. None of this is an argument that polar bears don't belong on a dangerous animals list. The point is narrower. If the defining standard is deliberate predatory intent, the American black bear qualifies by the exact same measurement and has a higher total death count. Leaving it off while keeping the polar bear on suggests the list was built around cultural imagery, the terrifying white Arctic giant, Rathifs, than around consistent behavioral data. The crocodile statistic that won't die. If the bear comparison exposes an inconsistency, the crocodile comparison exposes something different, a statistic that has been repeated for decades without anyone checking where it actually came from. The Nile crocodile is frequently described, including in interviews referenced earlier, as the single deadliest crocodilia, and species on Earth, supposedly even more dangerous than the saltwater crocodile. The number, almost always quoted, is 1,000 human deaths per year. Tracing that figure back to its origin, it lands in historical estimates from the 1940s and 1950s, during the final years of British colonial administration in East Africa, a period before large-scale commercial hunting for the leather trade had crashed crocodile populations. A well-known outdoor sporting magazine repeated the 1,000 deaths per year figure from that era, and a 1969 book on crocodile natural history cited a similar number, while explicitly warning that no reliable record-keeping existed, and that the number was, in the author's own words, essentially a guess. Modern scientific sources tell a very different story. Major reference organizations now estimate somewhere around 200 Nile crocodile deaths per year, with other institutions citing a few hundred confirmed cases annually. Global crocodile attack tracking databases openly acknowledge that African incident data is severely underrecorded because of inconsistent reporting across dozens of countries. This is where modern tracking directly challenges the popular narrative. Compiling verified global data, AC, Ross' recent 9-year period shows the Nile crocodile responsible for roughly 820 deaths total, about 91 per year. In that same window, the saltwater crocodile of Asia and Oceania was linked to approximately 1,190 deaths, about 132 per year. In other words, over the last decade of systematically tracked incidents, the saltwater crocodile has actually driven a higher confirmed human death toll than the Nile, the crocodile, by roughly 41 lives per year on average. The database itself notes that African reporting gaps mean the real difference could be smaller than it looks, but the direction of the evidence doesn't support treating the Nile crocodile as uniquely dominant. It makes ecological sense once you consider geography. The saltwater crocodile's range stretches from eastern India through Southeast Asia and down into northern Australia, a region packed with dense human populations and massive river systems. Papua New Guinea alone accounted for well over 350 saltwater crocodile deaths in that 9-year span, and researchers have flagged rising attack frequency in hotspots across Sumatra, Kalimantan, and Sri Lanka. There's one legendary crocodile story that keeps getting used to prop up the Nile crocodile's fearsome, a reputation, and it deserves a closer look, the Ramree Island incident of 1945. During the final stages of World War II, a retreating Ed version of the story, including on major podcasts, claims that roughly 1,000 Japanese soldiers were killed and eaten by saltwater crocodiles in a single night or two, a figure that even made it into the Guinness World Records as the deadliest crocodile attack in history. But when historians and biologists actually traced the source of that number, it fell apart. It comes primarily from the memoir of a Canadian wildlife biologist and naval officer stationed nearby who vividly described hearing crocodiles and cries in the dark, but who has not personally inside the swamp that night. The 1,000 death figure never appears in official British military logs. While roughly 1,000 soldiers did enter that swamp, later historical review shows crocodile attacks accounted for only a small fraction of the deaths. Most soldiers died from exhaustion, dehydration, disease, and ongoing British artillery fire from surrounding positions. A well-known Crow, Codell researcher who reviewed the military records in detail, concluded there is no historical or biological basis for the 1,000-men-Aten version of the story. Notice the pattern. 1,000 deaths per year from Nile crocodiles, 1,000 soldiers supposedly eaten at Ramree. Rue and dramatic, quotable numbers. And in both cases, the moment you apply any real scrutiny, they collapse. A decade of actual track-a-date. Hay shows the saltwater crocodile, the species left completely off the viral list, is currently linked to more predatory human deaths than the Nile crocodile. Leaving it off the list doesn't reflect biology. It reflects which crocodile Western media happens to be more familiar with. The big cat, the list, forgot now to the cat family, where a genuine, well-documented killer goes conspicuously unmentioned. T. Jurors and leopards deserve their spots. Both have extensive, well-documented histories of man-eating behavior in the historical and motor N record. No argument there. But what about the African lion, Panthera leo? Completely absent from the list. In fact, in the very podcast T episode that popularized this theory, the host flatly stated that lions don't do that. That claim runs directly against more than a CE entry of documented mammalian behavior. Consider the historical record. In 1898, during construction of the Uganda Railway near the Tsavo River in Kenya, 2 maneless male lions, now known worldwide as the Tsavo man-eaters, systematically stalked, ambushed, and killed railway workers over a 9-month period. The project's chief engineer documented at least 28 confirmed kills at the time, though some estimates run considerably higher. When researchers at the University of California, Santa Barbara analyzed the skulls of those 2 lions in 2009, isotope analysis confirmed they had consumed substantial amounts of human tissue, and dental scans revealed severe jaw damage and dis-ease, likely a contributing factor in why they turned to easier prey. Tsavo wasn't an isolated fluke, and it isn't even the most extreme case. In 1991, a massive maneless male lion known as the man-eater of Mfue terrorized Zambia's Luangwa River Valley, killing at least 6 people. And in one chilling detail, carrying a victim's bell onjings through the village before it was finally shot. In the early 2000s, a lion nicknamed Osama was linked to nearly 50 deaths in southern Tanzania before it was killed in 2004. And the single most staggering case belongs to the Njombe lion pride. Between 1932 and 1947 in southern Tanzania, a cohesive pride that grew to as many as 15 individuals was responsible for well over 1,000 human deaths across a 15-year span, one of the deadliest sustained animal attack campaigns in recorded history. It also demonstrated something chilly. Ling. Predatory hunting of humans can be passed down through a pride, generation to generation, almost like a learned survival strategy. Ikram skeptics might argue these are historical anomalies, driven by injury, disease, or extreme famine. That's partly true. Injury and prey scarcity absolutely can trigger man-eating in lions, but that explanation can't be used to clear an entire species when modern data tells essentially the same story. Dr. Craig Packer, widely regarded as the world's leading authority on lion ecology at the University of Minnesota, led a landmark analysis of lion conflicts in Tanzania. Between 1990 and 2004, lions attacked more than 800 people in Tihat's single country, resulting in over 560 confirmed deaths, an average of roughly 40 fatalities per year in just one of the 26 African nations where lions still exist. Packer's research found that most of these attacks occurred on pitch-dark moonless nights, with lions systematically targeting farmers sleeping in open fields to guard crops, or people walking alone between villages after dark. In essentially all of these modern fatal cases, the motive was purely predatory. Broader global wildlife mortality estimates put lion-related death as worldwide at around 250 per year. Even applying a generous margin for underreporting, that firmly places the lion as an ongoing active predatory threat, not a historical footnote. So why isn't the lion on the media's list? There's no scientific justification for the omission. It likely comes down to cultural bias. We picture lions as noble, majestic guardians of a pride, rather than calculating, silently, ambush hunters of people. Or, more simply, the original list was assembled casually, from memory, during an unscripted podcast conversation, without pulling up the actual research. What the pattern actually shows line up all 3 groups, bears, crocodilians, and big sea iats, and a clear pattern emerges. The viral list of 4 isn't fabricated nonsense. Tigers, leopards, Nile crocodiles, and polar bears are all genuinely dangerous animals. But the list was built on media familiarity, not behavioral evidence. The American black bear has the polar bear's predatory rate almost exactly, yet gets ignored. The saltwater crocodile now outpaces the Nile crocodile in confer modern fatalities, yet gets left out. And the African lion has one of the most extensively documented histories of systematic human hunting of any land predator on Earth, yet was flatly denied a place on the list. Which raises the real question. If the popular list isn't grounded in a consistent scientific standard, what would an actual scientific standard even look like? Defining hunting a human properly? Before we can argue about how many species hunt humans, we need to define what hunting a human actually means. This isn't a philosophical detour. It's a strict question of behavioral classification, and answering it changes almost every statistic covered so far. Picture 3 separate scenarios. A brown bear mauls a hiker who wandered too close to her den. A lioness kills a herder who stepped into her pride's core territory. A crocodile silently pulls a villager underwater while they're collecting water at a riverbank. A different species, 3 completely different underlying motives. But if you only look at the outcome, one dead person, all 3 CACs look identical on paper. This is exactly the trap that popular media falls into, and exactly the problem that rigorous science has to untangle. In behavioral biology, a fatal large carnivore attack generally falls into one of 4 categories. First, defensive attacks. Triggered when an animal feels cornered or threatened, a pure survival reflex with zero nutritional motive. Second, maternal defense, an instinct to eliminate perceived threats to offspring. Third, territorial attacks, meant to drive an intruder out of a claimed area. And fourth, predatory attacks, the only category where the animal genuinely identifies a human as a food source and initiates a deli. Berate stalk. From a strict biological standpoint, only that 4th category qualifies as true human hunting. This isn't a pedantic technicality. It completely reshapes how we should interpret these animals. As covered earlier, brown bears have a high total death count, but comprehensive field studies show only around 11% of those cases are genuinely predatory. The rest are defensive or maternal. Labelli. The brown bear, a human hunter, purely based on body count, would be a basic failure of behavioral science. So how do researchers actually diagnose motive in cases with no surviving witnesses? A large-scale global study titled A Worldwide Perspective on Large Carnivore Attacks on Humans, published in the journal Scientific Reports, analyzed 3,280 documented carnivore attacks between 1950 and 2019 NBU. Held a rigorous framework specifically to isolate genuine predatory behavior. To classify an attack as predatory, investigators look for at least one of 4 physical evidence-based criteria. First, the victim's body was moved, dragged or carried away from the attack site E to a more secluded location, a classic predatory behavior meant to secure the kill away from competitors. Second, caching behavior. Your body was hidden, buried, or covered with leaves and debris, a behavior well documented, particularly among large cats like leopards and D-lions, intended to preserve the kill for later feeding. Third, direct consumption, though researchers apply this one carefully, since a lack of feeding doesn't automatically rule out predatory intent, as the animal may simply have been chased off before it could return. And fourth, guarding behavior. The animal is found lingering near the remains, aggressively defending the body from anyone trying to recover it, a clear sign the animal has claimed the body as its own food source.